Good evening and welcome to Hello It's Us, a program based on the premise that life in general goes better if it's all of us working together as opposed to you, me, and them working at cross purposes. Hello It's Us is brought to you through a collaboration of the folks at the Center for Disabilities and Development, Uptown Bills, and all the folks here at Public Access Television Channel 18. I'm Terry Cunningham, Keith Ruff, my co-host. And tonight we have one of our favorite shows of the year, where we have our local legislators come in before the session and chat about what looks like they're going to be big issues for the session, what problems there may be, and of course now in the new environment after the recent election, how things may change. To my right, we have Vicki Lensing, Joe Bolcom, and Mary Masher. Welcome, guys. It's always fun to have you on.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Now, what do we want to start with? Let's start with what changes the recent elections have had on the face of both national and Iowa politics, or will have.
Why don't you start with the Senate, Joe?
Yeah, well, so the very competitive elections, as people know, at the federal level, we have a new United States Senator. Tom Harkin, of course, is retiring or is retired, and Joni Ernst was victorious, and so she's going to be our new United States Senator. Congressman Loebsack won re-election. There were a couple other competitive races from Congress that were won by the Republicans, and so we went from having, two Democrats in Congress and 2 Republicans to having 3 Republicans and only 1 Democrat representing our congressional delegation. And then, of course, Joni Ernst is a new Republican United States Senator. At the state level, the Iowa Senate was 26-24, Democratic control, and it remains Democratic control 26-24. In the Iowa House, which was slightly Republican, got a little bit more Republican with this election. There are now 57 Republicans and 43 House Democrats, and Representative Masher and Lensing are in the Democratic caucus. And of course, the governor's race, Governor Branstad easily won re-election. So in terms of the dynamic of state government, it's kind of unchanged from the last 2 years. The Senate's controlled by Democrats, the House by Republicans, and we have a Republican governor. So it's going to require we continue to work together on all things that come before the General Assembly.
Without getting biased, why did Branstad win with a landslide?
Well, I think he's a formidable candidate. He loves to campaign. He spends 90% of his time campaigning and about 10% governing. He is Mr. Iowa. I mean, he's seen as just a regular old person that people apparently believe are doing a decent enough job. So he was a hard person to take on. Our candidate, Jack Hatch, did the best he could. He was, Governor Branstad had $100 to every dollar Jack had, and Senator Hatch never really competed in that by having TV commercials. He just wasn't well funded, and had trouble kind of breaking through. His campaign did. So it was an uphill battle, and I think everybody expected Governor Branstad to win, and he did.
And Keith, I would also say that across the nation, Republicans won governorships and took back House and Senate chambers at the state level, and then also, obviously, we lost Democrats across the country, both congressional and senatorial, and so that had a big impact in terms of that kind of a wave and the impact that it had here on Iowa, especially. So.
Sounds like Democrats need to do their homework.
it's hard to get Democrats out in off years,
Yeah.
and we struggle with that, and it's one of those things that we are very well aware of, and so we targeted and tried to identify who were the weak voting Democrats and our independents that tend to vote democratically, and to try to get them out this election cycle. And we did a better job than we did in 2010, just not good enough to be able to put us over the tide and win the governorship in both chambers. So we have our work cut out for us, there's no doubt about that. But I also think we're well aware of the challenges we face, and I think we did the right thing in terms of who we targeted. It's just still very difficult to get those Democrats out in those off presidential years.
Well, and it seems so confusing to me because the statement getting them out isn't even accurate anymore because folks can vote absentee without all of the rigmarole it used to be.
But
So,
when I say getting out, I mean just having them vote. I don't mean getting them to the polls. I hope you don't misinterpret
Okay.
that, because we totally agree. We try to identify those voters that can
Yeah.
vote early, and the whole idea behind that is the early voting and making sure that people go to satellite locations, and then also voting at the auditor's office and voting by mail. So we push that extremely hard. It's just that the Republicans did this time as well. And so we did probably twice as well as we did the 2010 in that off year. Republicans did 3 times better than they did in that year. And so that makes a difference.
I think too, we still need to educate. I think when we were doing calling, kind of the last few weeks, and people had requested an absentee ballot, and it was sitting there on their kitchen table, and I don't think they connected that the request meant that they got one, they need to return it. So I think, we need to continue to educate people on what the process is so they get those ballots back in.
yeah, there continues to be confusion on how you vote and what the,
That's
and
right.
it just baffles me on that. The one thing I tell people about when they talk about they've got a ballot or they vote early and that, once you vote and get that in, they quit calling you.
Yes,
What?
yes.
I didn't know that. I cast this ballot weeks ago.
And,
Maybe that's
and that's
the
one of our
selling-
selling points.
Yes,
When
it
we
is.
call, that's one of the things we tell them. And sometimes it works, not always, and especially if they've lost the ballot or they misplaced it, or, God, I threw that out weeks ago, and we hear that,
I
from
didn't
time
realize
to
that was my
time.
ballot.
Yeah, or we registered maybe a student who is now in Florida. We did that in the summer months, and now they're off to college, and they're no longer here to be able
Yeah.
to vote, and to get their ballot to them and back again is more of a challenge, especially when they're that
Yeah.
far away. So parents can only do about so much.
Yeah.
So,
What are some of this year's issues, whether left over from last session or new this session?
Well, I think we still have some leftover issues, don't you? I
Sure
think
do.
education, healthcare, mental health issues. I would throw out roads and bridges and possibly a gas tax, but I think depends who you talk to is whether that's really on the table or not.
and I would also say, all of us have been working with our senators in the whole issue of university and regent funding, because that's an enormous issue for us here locally. But we also believe it has impacts for the entire state. If we're going to start competing for students that are Iowa kids, there's a limited number. And we're going to be taking those kids from Iowa State and UNI, or we're going to take them from our community colleges and our 4-year private schools. And both the community colleges and the private 4-year schools are extremely concerned about that,
Yeah.
because they know that's going to affect their bottom dollar too. And especially in those small towns where those private colleges are the lifeblood of those
Yeah.
towns. And if they're gone, those, that makes a big difference in terms of the economic impact in that whole community. So we've been talking to the university folks, we've been working with our colleagues in the House and Senate to educate them about the implications, they're already getting pushback from their community colleges and their private four-year institutions in their own hometowns and areas, because they recognize the concerns and the problems with, again, recruiting from that finite group of students.
Yeah, that's a very confusing issue to kind of wrap your head around for how it benefits.
Well, I think what we try to do, especially for our colleagues, and this has always been the case, is look big picture at what all three state universities contribute to Iowa. And certainly we have the hospital and healthcare dynamic that we add, but you look at the three universities and most of our teachers, dentists, pharmacists, nurses, they're all Iowa educated and high percentages in the 80s and 90s in each of those fields that stay in this state. So it's a true investment. And I think it's hard for us because the university is right here in Iowa City. The view is that, well, you're the only one who benefits. And our colleagues, some of them, fail to recognize they have alumni in their districts, they have parents of students, and they have students in their districts. So really, it's an issue that concerns all of us.
Yeah, the whole big picture for anything seems to be very difficult when all you can see is how it's going to affect your own backyard.
Yeah.
Terry, we also have some work to continue to do on the mental health system. And Joe's been involved in that since he's been a supervisor. And now that he's a senator, he has more of a role in terms of making sure that what we do statewide is going to have a positive impact on us locally as well. But one of the things that we've done now is created regions for our mental health systems. And Johnson County has gone with, is it 8 other counties, Joe?
Yeah.
So we're in a 9-county system, and with this system approach, the whole idea is to be able to provide services for all. So it shouldn't matter whether you live in Iowa County, or you live in Lynn County, or you live in Johnson County, or one of the other small counties that we also have in our region. They should be able to access the same quality of mental health services and services for those who need it. And so that was the intent behind the reorganization. Obviously, we still have some issues with who gets the services, is there enough money to go around, and then how do we go forward in terms of the funding formula to make sure that people are getting the services they need.
I'm on the advisory committee for this region.
So tell us what you think. I mean, just some comments from you, I'd be curious.
Well, it's still early enough that there's a lot of confusion as to how it's going to work and how things are going to get paid for and what services are going to be offered and what aren't. And it just seems like it was pushed a little fast. And that some of the dates for having regions together should have happened earlier so they had more time to work with each other and really figure out what's going on. And there's some real concerns as to what July 1st, 2015 is going to bring about. But at least in this region, people are talking. And that was one of the biggest fears of going in to a region and, what size county you were and where that was going to be in the pecking order and whether the small counties were going to have as much say as the big counties. And, at least I think some of that has been alleviated. And counties aren't quite as scared of just getting squished in it.
Yeah, I think the county, we've asked them to do a lot, and they've done an amazing job, I think, in getting organized in a relatively short period of time. One of the big challenges for most of the new regions is trying to put in place emergency services for people that have mental health crisis, and being able to provide a response and a safe place and maybe a residential opportunity. And I know that's one of the top priorities of our region, is to get a better set of emergency crisis services together for folks, and that's kind of work ahead. The other thing I think that's happened is with the Affordable Care Act, we have many people that were being paid for in the county system that now have coverage for mental health services. It's provided a little bit more resources to our local regions that will be resources that will be available to develop these crisis services that have been really needed for a very long time. So right now it's an enrollment period for the ACA, and there's probably 100,000 Iowa adults that still haven't signed up. People should contact us, certainly. Healthcare.gov is another website you can go, but we really want in the next year to get as many more people signed up for the Affordable Care Act as possible, because it's working really well.
Isn't that deadline soon for signing up? Isn't it this
There was a
week?
deadline this week, I think, for, I'm not exactly sure this week, but I think it's through like mid-February. February 15th is kind of a general sign-up period. I don't know if it was a small business sign-up or this week. There was a deadline this week, but the open enrollment goes on for a little bit through the first of the year, through February actually.
Wasn't this month also the Medicare one, and the opportunity
Sure.
to switch
Yeah.
coverages?
Yeah.
and-
Yeah, that's
That may
correct.
be what I'm
I
thinking
think
of.
that,
Yeah.
Okay.
because those two are happening at the same time, I think there's,
So the Affordable
A
Care
number
Act's
of
working,
people out
is
there.
working well for people. People can see, under the old system, you had to come to Iowa City to get health care if you were
Yeah.
really sick, and now people get to see their own private doctor right where they live, and we don't talk about that as a feature of the Affordable Care Act, but it's extraordinarily important for people to be able to get health care where they
yeah.
happen to live across the state.
I certainly hope people understand that that's the way it works, because, yeah, that was just incredibly a hardship on a lot of people to
Right.
have to come all the way across the state to get health care.
Terry and Keith, the other thing that we've also been meeting with constituencies on is dealing with the whole children's mental health system and trying to identify what are the needs there and how do we create a seamless system, again, where kids get services that they need and their families also have that support system and the services they need to be able to keep those kids in their home. There are some heart-wrenching stories of parents who are really struggling. And one of the things that has been talked about, and I know it was talked about in the county supervisor race, was a crisis management team at the local level that would be there to help with both adults and kids. And so when there were problems, there was someone that could be contacted, and there was a plan in place for what services were available and what they could have as options in terms of treatment or services, either one. And so I think, those are discussions that we are continuing to have. I know that they have been working on that at the state level, but it's kind of taken a back seat to some other things in terms of even the adult mental health redesign.
Yeah.
So those are things that should be a priority, and we should pay attention to that, because those kids are that next generation of adults, and the sooner we can provide them services, the more successful they can be in school and in work settings and being productive. So those are the things that we're looking at. We've talked about before that it's pretty sad that the largest mental health institution in the state is our prisons. And the fact that they provide that, because if we don't have something at the local level for people to get those services, they oftentimes end up in the criminal system. And that's unfortunate, and it's preventable. And it would save the state a great deal of money if we could, again, intervene and keep them with the services they need and keep them productive.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's, as with so many services, it's cheaper to provide them in a home and community-based setting. It's a whole lot cheaper to do the intervention programs and that, and keep somebody in the community, than it is to ship them off to some kind of facility that costs 3 or 4 times as much. It also saves money in the long run to keep people in the community, because you can serve more people for less dollars. It costs.
That's exactly right.
It helps families. It just is so much better overall.
Well, and I think with children and youth, when you can identify those problems earlier, then it means that you can intervene or prevent sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and I think with so many of them, even with the correction things, you know, if there's a way to get with somebody before they decide to go out and commit a crime because they're tired of being homeless or they're tired of whatever, and they know exactly what they can do to get X amount of time to get in, you know, especially this time of year, you know,
Sure.
4 walls and a cot and 3 meals don't look nearly as bad from the inside
Yeah.
as it does if you're out sleeping underneath the bridge right now.
Yeah.
And Terry, I was excited to see that the city is looking at
Yeah.
renting out the old Aldi
Yeah.
store
Yeah.
Yeah, another
for
place.
another,
Shelter.
shelter house for folks in the wintertime. And I think it's the next 2 months that they're planning on renting that space. But we also turn people away at shelter house all the time for lots of reasons. Sometimes it's space, but sometimes it's because they may have drug or alcohol issues and they aren't allowed and can't take them there. But having some place for them to be is important. I think we've all seen the pictures of them sleeping at City Hall in the lobby at night because it's open and that may be a warm place to be and it's better than being out in the cold. And so providing those kinds of options at the local level, I think are really important, and I'm glad to see the city stepping up to do that.
Yeah.
And I think they're working with the county as well, and it's kind of a combination of funding streams in order for us to be able to do this. And we know it's got stopgap. It's not a long-term solution, but it certainly gets us through those winter months when
Yeah.
people could freeze to death outside. We know that.
This is for the 3 of you. Do you think the legislature is ready to step in if these regional plans go awry? In other words, how long is the legislature going to wait until a problem grows out of proportion?
Well, I think that people are feeling pretty good. I think about how the regions have formed. They're all
Okay.
different. There's some that are 4 or 5 counties. There's some that are 22 counties. Ours is a 9-county region, and I think it's too early to say whether or not this has been a good idea or not. It's going to be a few years probably down the road before we'll be able to assess that. But we need good leaders. We need good leadership, in terms of how these organizations are staffed, good input from providers, and services need to be developed. Representative Masher said at the outset, this was an attempt to try and make sure there was access to good quality services everywhere in Iowa, and they weren't. And so I think that's going to be one of the measures. Have we expanded to places to provide services and where we haven't in the past? And this area of emergency and crisis service is a huge deal. And I think we'll also measure our success by whether or not we get a good system in place to help people in crisis. So I think it's a work in progress, Keith. I'm not sure there's a master plan that the state's going to swoop in and take over. I think that keeping local elected officials and local leaders involved in the system is probably a good idea rather than just having the state come in and do the system. So I'm hopeful that we're going to have some success with what we've done in this new plan.
And Keith, all of us have been in the legislature long enough to know there's no perfect bill. And no matter how well you examine what you're doing, there's always going to be hiccups along the way. And we've got to react to those. And that's why we want to keep in touch with our local supervisors, people like you, to make sure that we're getting that feedback so we know where are the bumps and where are the hiccups that we need to fix. And we can be responsive to that. We do that all the time. We put legislation in place, and then we find out where are the problems, and then we go back and react to those and try to correct those problems.
I guess I just wanted to know if there was a reaction plan ready for that.
Well, and I don't think there's a plan, like Plan B and Plan C and anything like that. But,
Okay.
and I don't think there's a plan to pull the plug and say we're just gonna dump it all, because starting over would not be
No.
advisable either.
I
And people
agree.
would get left out in the cold if we did that as well. So I think the important thing is to communicate and find out where are the glitches and to try to work on creating a better bill and a better system.
And don't you think different regions may encounter different barriers or different problems? So I'm not sure, it can't be a one-size-fit-all
Yep.
either. So I think our job is to listen and stay in touch with and hope that the boards and the locals who are doing the hard work get back to us with the problems. And if there are pitfalls that we haven't anticipated, then let us know what we can do.
And an example of that, I think Johnson County and our region is one of the few that have blended the money. And right now, that's an issue because a lot of them have still kept their money siloed. And the whole idea behind the region was to bring everything together and be able to provide services for all, not to keep the money siloed. And so that discussion's gonna have to take place, and we're gonna have some heart-to-heart discussions
Yeah.
with some of those counties that I don't think really got it
Well,
in terms of
I
that regional
think
approach.
they got it.
I think
but-
they're apprehensive.
Yeah, I mean, it all goes back to it, and it's kind of a hard concept to think, okay, we're gonna bring this group together, and everybody's gonna put their money in a pot, and we're gonna pay things that way. Well, when you've got Johnson County and Lynn County,
Yeah.
and Benton and Iowa County, there's nowhere near a comparison of those dollars. And, there's also not a really good comparison of the number of people being served. But it's hard to think that it's equitable to have everybody throw their money in the pot and have a few groups who are going to provide most of the people who are going to use up funds. And what if those funds get gobbled up? So I think there's that. We'll keep our money here and you tell us when we have to pay something. But, I mean, speaking of dollars, that certainly is the key for all these services. And the legislature, over the past few years, has done a good job of attempting to allocate additional and substantial dollars to the system with a lot of pushback from the governor's office. How is that going to change this year? What's it going to take?
Well, I think we've got a really tight budget coming into the fiscal year 16, and it's going to be a fight. I mean, the governor's priorities are tax cuts to large out-of-state corporations. We've did a lot of property tax cutting. A lot of that benefit goes to companies that have their home office somewhere else. We've spent another $50 million on tax credits this year that we weren't spending a couple of years ago, but the governor wanted that. So I think his priorities are taking care of the fat cats, and we have to struggle to kind of put resources behind these programs. I think it's going to be a challenging year budget-wise, given some of the decisions we've made about some of these tax cuts we've given.
Well, we've burnt through our time for today. I think we probably will take you up on your offer to come back sometime mid-session and
That'd be great.
I would
let
be
us know
glad
what's
to.
going on then. But thank you as always.
Yes,
you.
Lots of
Thanks
fun.
for having us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all at home, and we'll see you sometime next year.
Have a good holiday. Bye now.